An arrogant millionaire mocked a poor black maid by challenging her to the dance floor. But little did he know, this maid was a hidden dance champion, about to shatter his pride, his honor, and even his son's future forever. The ballroom glittered with golden chandeliers, their lights spilling down in delicate streams upon the polished marble floor. Waiters in starched white uniforms carried trays of crystal glasses filled with expensive wine, weaving in and out among the city's most powerful elite. Tonight was not just another charity gala. Tonight, the Harrington family was displaying its grandeur for the world to see, celebrating the birthday of their only son, Daniel, heir to one of the most influential billionaire empires in America. The guests, adorned in gowns stitched with silver threads and suits tailored in Paris, whispered to one another in anticipation. Music swelled in the background, violins and cellos rising in harmony, as though announcing the entrance of a king. Daniel Harrington, tall, handsome, and arrogant, stepped into the ballroom with his mother, Victoria, a woman whose name carried both reverence and fear among those who served her. Behind the polished brilliance of the evening, among the staff who moved quietly and unnoticed, stood a young black maid named Liana. She wore the plain uniform of service, black dress, white apron, hair tied back neatly. Her hands carried trays and glasses, her eyes lowered as the wealthy passed by, never sparing her more than a dismissive glance. Yet within her lay a history few could imagine, a story no one in that glittering hall cared to hear. For Liana was not just a maid. She had once been a dancer, a prodigy of grace and rhythm, trained in the discipline of waltz, tango, and ballet. Years ago, she had dreamed of stages, of audiences rising to their feet in thunderous applause. But dreams do not always survive the harsh winds of reality. Her mother's illness, the crushing weight of bills, and the lack of opportunities for a black woman in a world designed to keep her small, had forced her to set aside her slippers and gowns. Instead, she had taken up the uniform of servitude, working quietly in homes like the Harringtons, invisible to those who believed wealth equaled worth. But fate is strange. It hides opportunities inside cruel disguises. And on this particular night, Victoria Harrington, with her sharp tongue and sharper pride, turned the glittering ballroom into a stage where Liana's hidden truth would be tested before them all. The music shifted, violins striking a new rhythm, the waltz. Couples turned toward the floor, adjusting gowns and ties, ready to take their places. Daniel, leaning casually against a marble pillar, rolled his eyes. He was expected to dance, expected to show elegance befitting his family's name. But his arrogance disguised his insecurity. Daniel Harrington had 2 left feet. His tutors had long despaired of teaching him the art of waltz. He tripped, stumbled, and laughed his way through every lesson, certain his family's wealth excused his failures. Victoria, however, had never tolerated weakness. As eyes turned toward her son, she scanned the room, her face tightening with impatience. It was then her gaze fell upon Liana, standing silently at the edge of the hall with a tray of drinks balanced in her steady hands. A cruel thought entered her mind, the kind of thought only those drunk on power can entertain. She leaned toward Daniel and whispered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you see that, maid? If you can manage to dance this waltz without looking like a fool, I might actually believe you're ready to lead this family. But if you cannot, then perhaps I should let her take your place. For surely even a maid can step with more dignity than you." The words struck Daniel like a slap. His pride flared, and his eyes narrowed. Yet Victoria was not finished. Raising her voice just enough for nearby guests to hear, she added with icy mockery, "In fact, why not test it? If you can lead this maid through a waltz, Daniel, and make it convincing, why then, I shall promise this room that she is worthy of marrying my son." The guests gasped, laughter rippling through the hall like cruel music. Heads turned, eyes seeking out Liana, who stood frozen in disbelief. Heat rushed to her face, not from shame but from fury. This was not an invitation. It was a humiliation, a spectacle designed to remind everyone of her place. To dance, not as an equal, but as a joke. A servant paraded before the wealthy like an object of ridicule. Her heart pounded, but Liana did not move. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes pressing into her, stripping her of dignity, reducing her existence to entertainment. Daniel, smirking now, strode across the floor toward her. "Well then," he said, his voice low but mocking. "Shall we give them a show, Maid?" Something inside Liana trembled, but it was not fear. It was the echo of years spent denying her gift, years of swallowing her pride while scrubbing floors for people who did not see her. In that trembling lived her mother's voice, urging her never to bow, never to forget who she was. Liana set down the tray with deliberate calm. Straightening her back, she looked directly into Daniel's eyes. The guests whispered louder now, some laughing, some gasping, curious at the audacity of a maid who dared meet the heir's gaze. "If you wish to dance," she said, her voice clear and steady, "then we will dance." For the first time that evening, silence fell over the hall. The orchestra paused, waiting. Victoria Harrington leaned back in her chair, satisfied that she had set the stage for humiliation. Daniel, confident that his wealth alone gave him victory, offered his hand. Liana took it, not as a servant, but as a woman reclaiming her place on the floor. The violins began again, and with that first step, Liana transformed the room. The violins lifted, filling the grand hall with a sweeping melody that carried both elegance and expectation. Daniel straightened his shoulders, masking his unease beneath the practiced smirk he always wore when eyes were upon him. He took Liana's hand, his grip careless, confident that he would control the moment simply because he was the Harrington heir. But from the very first step, the balance shifted. Daniel tried to lead, but his movements were stiff, clumsy, almost mechanical. He tugged at Liana's hand, stepping too quickly, turning too sharply. A ripple of laughter moved through the room as he stumbled slightly. His jaw tightened, and his face flushed with embarrassment. He had thought this would be a display of dominance, a way to put the maid in her place. Instead, it was he who looked the fool. Then Liana moved, her posture straightened with quiet dignity, her steps gliding across the floor as though the marble itself recognized her. She guided him, not with force, but with the gentle precision of a woman who knew the music in her bones. Each beat of the violin matched her rhythm. Each turn flowed with effortless grace. The guests, at first amused, began to fall silent. Their laughter faded into stunned whispers. It was no longer Daniel Harrington leading this dance. It was Liana. She didn't simply move. She soared. Her dress, though plain and meant for service, caught the light as she spun. Her eyes no longer lowered in submission, but lifted with quiet strength, focused not on the heir who clung to her hand, but on the music that carried her spirit. To the audience, it was a revelation. What they had dismissed as a maid suddenly bloomed before them as an artist, a champion hidden in shadows. Daniel's smirk faltered. He tried to regain control, but the harder he fought, the clearer it became that he could not match her skill. His foot struck hers clumsily once, and the audience gasped. Liana, without missing a beat, recovered the rhythm and turned it into part of the dance, covering his mistake with such elegance that many believed it intentional. Victoria Harrington sat frozen in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing. This was not the humiliation she had planned. The spectacle she had designed to mock was slipping beyond her control. For each second Liana danced, she stripped away the narrative of inferiority that Victoria had tried to write. The orchestra, sensing the energy, leaned into the music. The violins grew stronger, the cellos deeper, the rhythm more commanding. Liana twirled, her skirt catching the light, her every step declaring dignity. Her hand remained firm in Daniel's, but it was clear now to everyone. She was not his accessory, not a pawn in his game. She was the star of the ballroom. Murmurs spread among the guests. "Who is she?" whispered a woman in pearls. "She moves like a professional," said another man, adjusting his glasses. "This maid, she dances better than anyone here." The shift in the room was unmistakable. Respect, hesitant at first, was blossoming where mockery had been. Some guests, compelled by the sheer beauty of the performance, even began to applaud softly before the waltz had ended. Daniel, red-faced and desperate, hissed under his breath, "Stop showing off. You're making me look like an idiot." Liana's reply was calm, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "I am not showing off, Mr. Harrington. I am simply dancing. Perhaps the truth feels heavier than you expected." Her words stung him more than the whispers of the crowd. He tightened his grip, but it did not matter. The power had shifted, and there was no reclaiming it. As the music swelled toward its climax, Liana spun gracefully, guiding Daniel into a turn he could barely keep up with. And then, in the final flourish, she moved with such breathtaking precision that the entire room seemed to pause. The violins struck their last note, and Liana stood tall, composed, unshaken. Daniel, panting slightly, looked as though he had barely survived. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the hall, louder than anyone had expected. Not for Daniel, not for the Harrington name, but for the maid who had defied humiliation with grace and mastery. Daniel pulled his hand away, his pride wounded beyond repair. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, storming off the floor with his jaw clenched. His mother's face was pale with fury, her carefully crafted plan shattered before the eyes of the city's most powerful. Liana, however, did not flinch. She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging the applause, then turned to return to her post as though nothing had happened. But the eyes of the guests followed her, filled now not with ridicule but with awe, and perhaps a touch of shame for having once dismissed her. As she reached the edge of the hall, a voice stopped her. It was an older gentleman, one of the most respected figures in the city, a retired senator known for his dignity. He rose from his chair and declared loudly that, ladies and gentlemen, was no maid's dance. That was the dance of a champion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. Questions spread. Who was Liana? Where had she learned? Why was she in a maid's uniform instead of on a stage? Victoria Harrington clenched her fists beneath the tablecloth, her lips pressed thin with rage. Her attempt to reduce Liana had backfired spectacularly. Instead of disgrace, the maid had earned admiration. Instead of humiliation, she had won dignity. But for Liana, the night was not about applause or whispers. It was about something deeper. As she slipped quietly back into the corner of the hall, her chest rose with a breath she had held for years. She remembered her mother's words, spoken on her sickbed years ago. Never forget who you are, even when they try to make you small. Tonight, she had honored those words. Yet she knew this was not the end. The Harringtons were not the kind to forgive being upstaged. And in the glittering world of wealth and pride, victories came with dangerous consequences. Still, for the first time in years, Liana felt alive. She had danced, and in dancing, she had reclaimed her voice. The applause from the ballroom still echoed in Liana's ears long after she had slipped away into the narrow service corridor. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. For a few moments, the world had seen her not as a maid, not as a servant in a pressed uniform, but as a woman of skill, dignity, and fire. She leaned against the wall, steadying her breath, knowing full well this victory would not go unanswered. Behind her, in the glittering ballroom, Victoria Harrington's fury simmered like a storm trapped beneath glass. Her smile, polished and practiced for the elite, did not falter, but her eyes betrayed her rage. She leaned toward her son, Daniel, who sat sulking in his chair, his pride bruised beyond measure. "You made a fool of yourself," she whispered sharply. "And worse, you allowed her to make a spectacle of us. Do you have any idea what they're saying?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "She embarrassed me, Mother. She turned the whole room against me." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "No, you embarrassed yourself. She merely revealed what you truly are." Her words were a blade meant to cut, and they did. Daniel looked away, fists tightening, his humiliation hardening into something darker, resentment. He could still hear the laughter, see the looks of admiration cast toward Liana, not him. Each cheer from the crowd felt like a nail in the coffin of his pride. The guests, meanwhile, buzzed with curiosity and gossip. Small groups clustered near the tables, whispering in hushed but excited tones. "Did you see her footwork? Extraordinary. I heard she trained professionally once, before working here. A maid? Trained like that? Impossible. Unless the Harringtons have been hiding something." The whispers spread like wildfire. By the end of the night, Liana's name would be on the lips of nearly every guest. When the gala concluded, Victoria and Daniel withdrew to the family's private quarters above the ballroom. The moment the door closed behind them, Victoria dropped her mask of composure. "You will not let this stand," she hissed, pacing the room. "We cannot afford the narrative that a servant humiliated us in front of our peers. Our name must remain untouchable." Daniel's voice shook with both anger and desperation. "Then what do you want me to do? She's a maid, Mother. Fire her." Victoria turned to face him, her eyes cold. Firing her would only add fuel to their whispers. They would see it as punishment for her talent. "No, we must be strategic." Daniel tilted his head, suspicious. "Strategic how?" Victoria's lips curved into a smile that chilled the air. "We remind her where she belongs. If she dares to step out of line again, we crush her. Quietly. Completely. And you, Daniel, you will show the world that tonight meant nothing. You will walk into every room tomorrow with your head held high, as though the maid's little performance was beneath your notice." Daniel swallowed hard, but the venom in his heart grew sharper. He wanted more than to ignore Liana. He wanted revenge. Meanwhile, Liana moved through the servants' quarters with careful steps. The other maids and footmen glanced at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Some smiled timidly, whispering their congratulations, but others avoided her entirely, worried that being near her might invite trouble. One of the older maids, Ruth, pulled her aside. Her face was lined with years of quiet service, her voice hushed. "Child, you need to be careful. You embarrassed the Harringtons tonight. They don't forget, and they don't forgive." Liana's chest tightened. She knew Ruth was right. The applause of strangers was a fragile shield against the wrath of power. Still, something inside her refused to bow. "I didn't embarrass them, Ruth. I just danced. That's all." Ruth shook her head. Sometimes, doing what's right is enough to make the powerful feel humiliated. Later that night, alone in her small attic room, Liana sat by the window and let the moonlight wash over her. The city lights sparkled in the distance, reminding her of the world beyond the walls of the Harrington estate. She thought of her mother again, of the nights they had stayed awake listening to music on an old radio, her mother's hands guiding her through steps on the worn wooden floor. "Your feet will carry you to places your heart cannot yet imagine," her mother had once told her. "But only if you have the courage to let them." Liana whispered those words to herself now, as though speaking them aloud could anchor her courage for what lay ahead. The next morning, the storm began. News of the gala spread quickly. Society pages that usually praised Victoria Harrington's elegance instead buzzed about the mysterious maid who outshone the air. Photographs captured moments of the dance, the grace in Liana's steps, the tension in Daniel's face. Reporters speculated, spinning stories about who Liana really was, where she had come from, and why someone of her talent was hidden in a uniform of servitude. Victoria ordered her staff to remain silent, threatening dismissal for anyone who spoke to the press. But whispers have a way of escaping locked doors. Soon enough, the world outside was asking questions that the Harringtons could not answer without exposing their arrogance. In the estate, the atmosphere shifted. Some of the servants looked at Liana differently, with newfound respect. Others, fearful of retribution, avoided her entirely. And Daniel, he watched her like a hawk, his wounded pride festering into cruelty. One evening, as Liana carried linens down the hallway, Daniel intercepted her. His face was calm, but his eyes burned. "You think you humiliated me," he said quietly, stepping too close. "But you'll learn soon enough. People like you don't win in houses like this. You may have danced once, but I'll make sure you never step out of place again." Liana met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was calm, though her heart pounded. "I didn't dance to humiliate you, Mr. Harrington. I danced because it is who I am. And no matter what you do, you cannot take that from me." For a moment, something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He turned away, muttering under his breath, "We'll see." Liana continued down the hall, her step steady, though she knew the battle ahead was only beginning. The dance had awakened something not only in her, but in those who had witnessed it. And now, the question lingered in every corner of the Harrington estate. Could dignity, once revealed, be silenced again? The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Within the Harrington estate, every servant walked on eggshells, fearing the wrath of Victoria's displeasure. Daniel, humiliated yet unable to let the sting of defeat fade, grew colder, his every glance toward Liana carrying the weight of resentment. And yet, beyond the gilded gates of their mansion, the world buzzed with whispers. Articles appeared in papers across the city. The waltz that stole the gala. Photographers enlarged the grainy snapshots of Liana gliding across the ballroom floor, her posture proud, her eyes lit with determination. Though the papers could not identify her fully, they called her the Black Waltz star, speculating on who she might be. Some suggested she was a hidden relative of the Harringtons. Others insisted she must have been a trained professional who had somehow fallen into servitude. Victoria read every headline with tightening lips, her fury coiling tighter with each passing day. For her, this was not just scandal. It was a challenge to her power. How dare the world elevate a maid above her son? How dare the dignity of a servant overshadow the Harrington name? That evening, she summoned Liana to the grand study. The room was lined with towering shelves of leather-bound books, their spines gleaming like trophies of intellect, though few had ever been touched. Victoria sat behind the oak desk, Daniel looming at her side, arms crossed, jaw set. "Sit," Victoria commanded. Liana did not sit. She stood tall, her hands folded calmly in front of her. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Victoria's voice was smooth, but beneath it boiled venom. "Do you know what you've done? You've embarrassed this family. You've allowed gossip to spread like wildfire. You've drawn attention where there should be none. That ends tonight." Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You'll resign. Quietly. You'll leave this house and never speak of what happened. If you think anyone outside will care for a Maid story, you're mistaken. Without us, you're nothing." The words cut, but Liana did not flinch. She looked first at Daniel, then at Victoria. "You called me nothing when you put me on that floor to mock me. And yet, the world applauded me. That wasn't your doing. That was mine." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do not mistake applause for power, girl. The Harringtons have power. You have only what we give you." For a long moment, silence hung in the room. Then Liana stepped closer, her voice steady, resonant. "You are wrong, Mrs. Harrington. Power is not in your wealth, nor in these walls. Power is in dignity. And dignity cannot be given. It cannot be taken. It can only be lived." Daniel scoffed, rolling his eyes, but Victoria's hand tightened on the armrest of her chair. For all her composure, she could not deny the truth in Liana's words. The next morning, word reached the estate that a journalist had uncovered Liana's past. An article revealed her history, her early years as a rising dance talent, her performances in local competitions, the accolades she had once received before life's hardships forced her into servitude. Photographs from years ago accompanied the piece. Liana, smiling on stage, wearing gowns instead of uniforms, trophies held in her hands. The public response was immediate. Sympathy flooded in. The story was no longer about a maid humiliating the Harrington heir. It was about a talented black woman whose brilliance had been hidden in plain sight, whose dignity had shone even under oppression. Offers began to surface from dance companies, cultural foundations, even schools asking if she would teach. Inside the estate, chaos erupted. Daniel raged, smashing glasses against the wall, shouting about betrayal. Victoria tried to contain the storm, calling editors, threatening to sue, but the tide had already turned. The more they fought, the more they looked like villains in a story the public had already chosen sides on. Liana, meanwhile, faced a choice. She could leave quietly, take the opportunities opening beyond the mansion gates, and begin a new chapter. Or she could stand one final time in defiance of the Harringtons, not only for herself, but for every servant who had ever been silenced, every voice stifled by wealth and arrogance. That evening, as the family gathered with guests once more, Liana entered the ballroom not as a maid, but as herself. She had put aside the uniform and appeared in a simple yet elegant dress borrowed from a friend outside. Murmurs rose as she walked across the floor, uninvited yet unstoppable. Victoria rose from her chair, fury flashing. "How dare you?" But Liana raised her hand, her voice ringing clear across the hall. "You tried to make me small. You tried to turn me into a spectacle. But the truth is simple. I was never beneath you. My worth does not depend on your name, your wealth, or your approval. You asked me to dance, and I danced. What you meant for shame, I turned into pride. And tonight, I leave this house not as your servant, but as myself, whole, unbroken, and free." The room fell into silence. Even among Victoria's loyal circle, no one spoke. The weight of Liana's words hung heavy, undeniable. For the first time, Daniel could not find his arrogance. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight, his fists trembling at his sides. Victoria, though burning with rage, could not undo what the world had already seen. Liana turned, her step steady, and walked out of the grand doors. Beyond the gates, the night air was cool, filled with the hum of the city. For the first time in years, she felt the horizon open before her, vast and waiting. She thought of her mother's words again. "Your feet will carry you to places your heart cannot yet imagine." And as she stepped into the darkness toward a future bright with possibility, she knew the truth. She had carried her dignity through fire, and it had not burned. The maid the world once ignored had danced her way into freedom, and no power, no wealth, no name could take that from her again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel, because more heart-touching stories like this are coming your way every day.